Researchers at the University of Würzburg made a strange discovery about honeybees. The temperature a bee is raised at, down to a single degree Celsius, determines what job that bee will do for the rest of its life. Pupae kept at 35 degrees grow up to be foragers, the bees that fly out to find flowers. Pupae kept at 34 degrees become housekeepers, the bees that never leave the hive. And the bees responsible for setting that temperature, 1 degree at a time, they have their own job. They're called heater bees. And they essentially decide what the next generation of the colony is going to be. That finding came out of a research group led by Jürgen Tautz at Würzburg in the early 2000s. The paper was published in PNAS in 2003, and it shifted how biologists think about colony organization. Before the study, the default assumption was that worker bees were more or less interchangeable, with genetics or random life experience nudging them into different roles. Tautz and his team showed something tighter than that. They incubated batches of pupae at different temperatures in the lab, let them mature, and then watched what the adult bees actually did when they were released into a colony. The bees raised at the cooler end of the brood nest range stayed inside doing maintenance. The ones raised at the warmer end went out and foraged. The difference was a single degree. The bees that hold the brood at the right temperature in the first place are doing it manually, one cell at a time. To see how, you have to start with the brood nest. The brood nest is the heart of a beehive. It is the cluster of wax cells where the queen has laid her eggs, and where the eggs grow into larvae, then into pupae, then into adult bees ready to chew their way out. The whole colony, which can run to 50,000 bees during the summer peak, is built around protecting this central nursery. And the bees have a tight specification for it. The temperature has to stay between roughly 34 and 35 degrees Celsius. Drift too far below and the developing bees come out malformed or die. Drift too far above, and the same thing happens at the other end. The colony does not have a thermostat. It has staff. The staff includes a specialized subset of workers called heater bees. According to observations from researchers like Tautz at Würzburg and field beekeeping accounts collected over decades, heater bees climb into empty cells inside the brood nest and use their bodies as living radiators. They detach the gears that normally link their flight muscles to their wings. Then they fire those muscles at high frequency without moving the wings at all. It is the same machinery used for flight, redirected into pure heat production. A heater bee can push the temperature of its thorax up to 44 degrees Celsius, which is hot enough that you could feel it if you held one in your hand, and which is nearly 10 degrees warmer than an ordinary bee at rest. Sitting inside an empty cell, that one heater bee transmits warmth into the wax walls, and from there into the surrounding cells, where pupae are sealed in and developing. The cell the heater bee occupies acts like an oven brick. And because the bee can move from one empty cell to another, the entire grid of brood becomes a steerable heating system. Beekeepers using thermal imaging have photographed this directly. The brood nest, seen through an infrared camera, lights up in a patchwork of warm spots, each one a heater bee parked in a strategic cell. The Würzburg finding folds back on itself here. The heater bees set the temperature. The temperature decides what the pupa it is warming will grow up to be. A heater bee that nudges a particular cell to 35 degrees has just produced a future forager. A heater bee that holds a different cell at 34 has produced a future housekeeper. The colony is, in a real sense, casting its own workforce, one cell at a time, by deciding where in the narrow band of brood temperature each individual is raised. Heater bees are only half the temperature system. The other half kicks in when the problem flips and the hive gets too hot. On a 35-degree summer day, a beehive in direct sun would quickly cook itself if the colony did not intervene. The brood temperature only has a few degrees of tolerance, and ambient heat from the outside can push the inside of an untended hive well past 40. What the colony does instead, according to thermoregulation studies published in journals like PLOS ONE and PMC, is run a two-stage cooling system that any HVAC engineer would recognize. The first stage is forced air. A group of bees positions itself at the hive entrance and at internal passageways, then fans its wings hard, pumping outside air through the colony in a steady current. The second stage is evaporative cooling. Other bees collect water from puddles, dewdrops, and birdbaths, fly it back to the hive, and spread it as thin films across the wax surfaces of the brood combs. As the fanners drive air across those wet surfaces, the water evaporates and pulls heat with it. This is the same principle as the swamp cooler that sits on a roof in dry climates. Wet surface plus moving air equals lower temperature. The bees built it first, and they built it as a service performed by living staff instead of a machine. On a hot afternoon, a healthy hive can hold its internal temperature at 35 degrees while the outside air is 40. The brood develops normally. The pupae become the right kind of bees. The system holds. That holding is the part that is hard to appreciate from the outside. A modern office air conditioner, well maintained, holds its set point within a band of about 2 degrees Celsius, sometimes worse. A beehive with no electricity, no compressor, and no thermostat in any human sense, holds its brood nest within a single degree across both winter and summer. The colony's temperature stability beats most of the climate control systems humans pay monthly bills for. If you are enjoying this little colony as much as I am, hit subscribe. More stories like this on the channel every week. Winter is where the system gets even stranger. When outside temperatures drop toward freezing, the bees stop trying to heat the whole hive and instead form what beekeepers call the winter cluster. The cluster is a roughly spherical ball of tens of thousands of bees pressed tightly together, with the queen and any remaining brood near the center. According to reviews summarized at Honeybee Suite and in the PMC literature on bee thermoregulation, the center of the cluster sits between 34 and 35 degrees, the same range as a summer brood nest. The outer shell sits much cooler, sometimes only a few degrees above freezing, with the surface bees pressed body to form a living layer of insulation. The shell bees on the outside of the cluster are running cold. Their muscles slow down, they go nearly motionless, and they act as the colony's coat. The interior bees, meanwhile, are doing the metabolic work. They eat honey, which the colony stockpiled all summer, and they burn the sugar through the same flight muscle shivering mechanism the heater bees use in the brood nest. The combustion of honey is the entire source of the cluster's warmth. A strong colony will burn through tens of kilograms of honey over a winter just to keep the center warm enough. What keeps any individual bee from freezing on the shell is the rotation. The cluster does not have a fixed crust and a fixed core. Bees move. Cold outer shell bees crawl inward toward the warm interior to refuel and recover. Warm interior bees migrate outward to take a shift on the shell. The roles are continuously swapped across the duration of the winter. Nobody is left in the cold position long enough to be killed by it, and nobody hoards the heat-rich center position at the expense of the rest. The cluster is in effect a moving body of bees that takes turns being insulation. This is not coordinated by a leader. There is no bee in the middle calling out shift changes. The rotation emerges from local rules. A bee that is cooling down moves toward warmer neighbors. A bee that is overheating moves toward cooler ones. Apply that simple behavior across 50,000 individuals, and the cluster as a whole self-regulates. The honey gets metabolized at a steady rate. The heat moves outward in a controlled gradient, and the queen at the center stays warm enough to survive until spring. Stack the pieces together. A colony that holds its brood at 34 to 35 degrees with living heater bees in summer cells. A cooling system that runs on fanners and evaporated water on hot days. A winter cluster that rotates its shell to share the cold among everyone. And a developmental rule discovered at Würzburg that ties the exact temperature each pupa is raised at to the job that bee will hold for life. The colony is not just keeping itself alive at temperature. It is using temperature as a control surface, deciding what its own future workforce will look like by tuning the dial 1 degree at a time. The Würzburg result is what makes this hit differently than other examples of animal climate control. Most thermoregulating animals are managing their own bodies. The beehive is managing the bodies of the bees it is about to make. Whatever job the colony needs more of in a given season, the heater bees can produce by adjusting which cells get held at the forager temperature and which get held at the housekeeper temperature. The colony tunes its own labor force the way a factory tunes its production line, except the factory and the workforce and the thermostat are all the same swarm of 50,000 insects. Beehives have been studied for centuries. The thermal precision of a healthy colony has been measured with sensors for decades. The full developmental link, the part where a single degree of brood temperature decides whether a bee spends its life inside the hive or out in the flowers, is recent. And the closer biologists look, the more the beehive starts to read less like a colony of individuals and more like a single distributed organism that happens to be made of moving parts. The next time you walk past a hive on a hot afternoon and hear the dull hum of fanners working the air at the entrance, the bees inside are running an HVAC system, a swamp cooler, a thermal imaging guided brood nest, and a developmental program for the next generation, all at once, all on body heat and honey, and all held to within a single degree of the right answer. If you found this fun, there are more stories like this on the channel. See you in the next video.